We're staying in West Africa, where the top court has rejected a request by Niger's junta for a lifting of coup-related sanctions imposed by its neighbors, ruling that the junta is unconstitutional and therefore lacks the authority to make such a request. Recall that following the July coup that toppled Niger's President Mohamed Bazoum, the West African regional bloc ECOWAS imposed sanctions, including shutting borders with the member country, suspending financial transactions, and freezing Niger's assets. Neighboring Nigeria, a quarter of power that supplied 70% of Niger's electricity. The de facto government of Niger and natural persons and legal entities challenged the sanctions at ECOWAS Court of Justice in Abuja, arguing that they were causing severe hardship for Nigerians, including by curtailing supplies of food and medicine. Justice Tukpe Atoki, while delivering the ruling, called Niger's junta the result of an unconstitutional change of government and said that it is not recognized as a member state of the regional bloc. The ruling could further complicate efforts to resolve the political crisis in Niger and return the country to civilian rule. I have joining me now a professor of international relations and strategic studies, David Aworawo. He joins me to discuss this latest development. Good to have you join us, Prof.
Thank you for having me on the program.
So, Prof, I just want to get your reaction to this particular ruling. I know you've been following this development since July. What's your reaction?
The ruling is in order. The ruling agrees with the provisions of the 1993 ECOWAS Revised Treaty and the Protocol on Good Governance of 2001 by ECOWAS member states, which provide for rejection of military government and change of government that are unconstitutional in nature, that are not through elections, popular participation of the people. So the ruling is in order. The government itself, like the judge said, is not recognized. The government that brought the case to the ECOWAS court is not a recognized government because it's a product of unconstitutional change of government. So the ruling is fully in order. It's in line with the provisions of the ECOWAS Treaty of 1993 and the 2001 Protocol on Good Governance.
And I just want to ask, again, there are several people who have approached the courts on issues like this. It will seem as though the ECOWAS court is being very careful not to set a bad precedent. Prof, do you agree with that?
I agree fully with that. And the earlier reports, you see that just in the course of the last couple of weeks, we have attempted coup in Guinea-Bissau and also in Sierra Leone, which means that, the negative appellation of ECOWAS as the coup bet of Africa stands the risk of even being more entrenched and being more expanded if all of these had been successful. So ECOWAS wants to put its foot on the ground. The court recognizes the provisions of the constitution of ECOWAS, the ECOWAS treaty and all the other protocols that have been accepted and put in place by ECOWAS members. So it's in line with the spirit of governance, of administration that ECOWAS members have accepted, in the past 2 decades or so.
And what impact could this have on efforts to find a political solution to this particular situation?
Yes, contrary to the report that says that the ruling of the ECOWAS court might jeopardize efforts to find some reconciliation between ECOWAS and these countries where we have military rulers, I think the result will be the opposite. We stated in July when ECOWAS members talked about military intervention, and we said, no, that's not the route to go. That would just plunge ECOWAS into a crisis that will turn the place topsy-turvy. That the best way to go is to, bring sanctions that will bite the country, and that we saw the impact, when Mali felt the impact of sanctions, it came to ECOWAS and tried to see how it could adjust its timetable for return to democratic governance. So what I think is that the reason why the ECOWAS, the leaders of Niger, General Chiani and the rest of them have come to ECOWAS court is because the sanctions are biting. So ECOWAS just continue the sanction, even expand it, so that will compel the government to come to ECOWAS to agree to a shorter term to return to civilian government. They say 3 years. 3 years is too long. 2025 is more realistic. They should do all the things they need to do in 2024, and 2025 they hand over to civilian government. So I don't think it will have a negative impact. Rather, the grinding effect of the sanctions will compel these leaders to come to ECOWAS with a more realistic timetable to return to civilian government. That is what I think the impact will be, rather than that the ECOWAS ruling would lead to the opposite result. If ECOWAS had ruled in favor of Niger, that will embolden the military rulers, and they might even elongate even further the timetable they have brought. So I think the impact will be positive rather than otherwise.
What about the release of the former President Mohamed Bazoum? Do you think that this could also impact that, because that's one of the conditions also set by ECOWAS for the lifting of sanctions? Could this also impact on that decision to hold back the former, continue to detain the former president?
Again, I think it won't make them to want to continue to detain him. The sanctions will force them to come to ECOWAS with a more realistic position on all the issues. First, the issue of the timetable to return democratic governance. 1.5 years will just be fine instead of 3 years they have brought. And then the release of Bazoum. They could negotiate that. ECOWAS will give them a guarantee that Bazoum will not go and form a parallel government if he's released, because that's one of the fears of the ruling junta, thinking that if Bazoum is released, since many of the governments don't recognize the military government, they might support Bazoum to go and form a parallel government in exile or something. They should give them assurance along that line. And I think, they could discuss these things diplomatically and find a lasting solution. They could release Bazoum if these things are discussed, and they are sure that Bazoum will not form a parallel government if it's released. So I think the impact will be positive. What the court has ruled will be positive on all grounds, in the release of Bazoum and also in return to civilian government, because the sanctions are so grinding that the leaders will not be able to continue to govern well with the sanctions. So I think the impact will be positive rather than otherwise.
There's an ECOWAS summit coming up, I think the last for the year. We'll see how the African leaders respond to this. Thank you so much for talking to us, Prof. Always great to have you on. Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies, David Aworawu.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.